What's going on, guys? It's Fight Season MMA, and today I want to talk about the fights that happened last night. Dricus Du Plessis ended up getting the crown in the submission over Israel Adesanya to defend his middleweight title the first time. That was a massive win for Dricus Du Plessis' legacy, beating one of the best current UFC middleweights in the UFC organization. Also, Kai Kara-France knocks out Steve Erceg in the first round. Absolutely amazing performance from Kai. A lot of people wrote him off, including me. I had Steve Erceg winning that fight, but Kai Kara-France showed the veteran leadership he experienced after the fight and truly went in there and did his number to Steve Erceg. Dan Hooker versus Mateusz Gamrot was an absolute bloody war between the two fighters, and I did think they got the decision right, giving it to Dan Hooker. And then Jairzinho Rozenstruik versus Tai Tuivasa was a very fun fight, and Carlos Pratas got the knockout over Li Jingliang. A very bad knockout in that fight, but if you guys enjoy the UFC content, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. That is the best way to help support the channel grow. We're almost to 1,000 subscribers, so please go and help us reach that point. It is always so helpful when every single person subscribes. One subscriber means so much, and it's free, so go down there and hit the subscribe button. Also, if you love watching daily UFC content, please go down and hit the post notifications button just so you guys can always stay updated with the latest news and info in the UFC and MMA world. But let's jump right into the UFC 305 breakdown video in Perth, Australia. Okay, so starting with the main event, Dricus Du Plessis fought Israel Adesanya at UFC 305, and that was a very close fight in the first couple of rounds. I had it going 29-28 to Dricus Du Plessis going into that fourth round. I thought Dricus got a round one, which was very, very close. Round two was very decisive to Dricus, and round three I thought was pretty decisive to Israel Adesanya, with the most skewed round being round two to Dricus, and the closest being round one to Dricus. But Israel Adesanya was doing very good with defending the takedowns in that fight, but I think Dricus just gassed Izzy out very hard in that fourth round. Dricus was also super tired going into that fourth round too, which really allowed him, he was using a lot of energy with the different grappling exchanges, with the punches, and it was a very good war between these two individuals. Now, I think that Israel Adesanya really was holding his own against Dricus Du Plessis. I thought the odds were so close because of the puncher's chance that Izzy had being a counter striker, but as the fight went longer and longer and longer, we all knew that it would be harder for Israel Adesanya to win because that grappling from Dricus Du Plessis would have taken effect and ultimately, hindered Izzy's movement, his mobility, his athleticism, and his just gas tank overall in the fighting department. But Dricus Du Plessis got a very impressive win during this fight, and I think that was something that really showed of Dricus Du Plessis' preparation, him not overlooking Israel Adesanya. Izzy did look really good out there. He was doing his things, but Dricus Du Plessis, as he says, his plan was perfect, and he executed it to perfection, which is something that you need to do on a daily basis in order to get a win in the UFC at that high of level. Now, Dricus Du Plessis is going to take some time off. I think his next fight will be against Sean Strickland in the middleweight division, which is a rematch after Dricus Du Plessis won the belt. I think this is going to be a very incredible fight. The only person who I could see wins or go over Strickland would be a possible Robert Whittaker knockout over Khamzat Chimaev, or a Khamzat knockout over Robert Whittaker, possibly happening at UFC 308. Ultimately, Dricus Du Plessis looked amazing against Israel Adesanya, and it was a very, very, very important performance for Dricus to cement himself, beating one of the most accomplished middleweights when there was still questions about Dricus Du Plessis' legacy or upcoming fights that he had in the UFC organization. In the co-main event, we had Kai Kara-France versus Steve Erceg, and Kai Kara was going in there with that blitz, that 1-2 combo, that right, left, right to the dome, and he eventually caught Steve Erceg with about 1:15 in that first round, which was a very impressive knockout. Steve Erceg's a guy who is very socially cognitive while in the UFC octagon, and he was able to stand up straight, move side to side, and really get away from Kai Kara-France in that early things of rounds. He's kind of like Bobby Green in the fact that Bobby Green dodges punches by millimeters, and that is something that really can hurt you when you fight someone such as powerful as Kai Kara-France. That Bobby Green versus Jalen Turner fight would be a perfect example of Bobby trying to move a little bit out of the way, but Jalen Turner being too accurate to fall for the tricks. Kai Kara had obtained so much power. He really has so many different ways to win inside the UFC, and truly it was a very impressive performance for Kai Kara-France at UFC 305 in that co-main event over Steve Erceg, who possibly beat Alexandre Pantoja at UFC 301. I think Kai Kara-France should call for the title shot, and I think he's a rightful challenger next for Pantoja. I don't know if them two have fought prior, but I'm assuming they have, considering that Pantoja, I feel like, has fought everyone in the UFC, but I think that you do that fight for the title next, possibly at UFC Madison Square Garden, at UFC 309. Sometime coming up, I think would be a very interesting time to do that fight. Also, I think that you would do Steve Erceg around someone, possibly a Manel Kopp, someone like that in that UFC flyweight division would be a good test for Astro Boy Erceg. But Kara France is on the high road. He's coming off that Amir Albazi win, or the Amir Albazi loss, and this win over Steve Erceg erases that completely and thrusts France into the title picture. In the featured bout on UFC 305, it was Dan the Hangman Hooker beating Mateusz Gamrot in an absolute war in that fight. Mateusz Gamrot has got a rap for being a very boring fighter in the UFC, but I think any fighter, if you give them the right dance opponent, it is going to be an absolute incredible fight. And Dan Hooker is always that man. His fights with Dustin Poirier, even his fight with Michael Chandler, how long it lasted. Dan Hooker is one of the most fun fighters in the UFC, and truly, he looked so good against Mateusz Gamrot. Those rounds were so close. I didn't know who won each individual round, but it seemed like I had Dan Hooker winning most of the rounds, either 30-27 or 29-28, either way, but they were just so close internally that truly, I don't know. I couldn't give you a specific prediction on each individual round, but from the overall fight, I did think Dan Hooker won the fight. I think that Dan Hooker is going to be into a top 5 ranking, and could you imagine a fight with Dan Hooker and Justin Gaethje? That would be such an incredible fight to put on. Dan Hooker is one of the baddest men on the entire planet and will stand and trade, while Justin Gaethje is willing to lay his life on the line and not be living the next day after his fight. That would be one of the craziest fights you could ever put together as a 5-round co-main event on a massive card. I would 100% be there for that, but very impressive performance of Dan Hooker. He was defending the takedowns amazingly through that entire fight. In that first round, he kind of got caught into some ground and pound, but as that second and third round rolled around, he was using different strategies to defend the takedown. He was using a guillotine to really stop Mateusz from forwarding, and he was defending perfectly with some great sprawls in those exchanges to really deter Mateusz for getting into his different positions prior to getting top control or anything else like that. But ultimately, I do think that Dan Hooker looked amazing last night. I think a fight with Justin Gaethje, possibly a rematch with Michael Chandler, or someone, maybe even Charles Oliveira, would be a very fun fight for Dan the Hangman in his next one. Tai Tuivasa versus Jairzinho Rozenstruik was a actually pretty good heavyweight war. They were swinging in that second and third round over there, which I think was a very fun way to get that fight going. But the ref who had that fight 30-27 to Tai Tuivasa could genuinely I don't know what he was doing, and thankfully last night on the broadcast they said they relieved the referee who put that scorecard out there, because genuinely that was awful to see Tai Tuivasa get 3 rounds over Jairzinho Rozenstruik. At most, you could give Tai Tuivasa 1, but I had that fight 30-27 to Jairzinho. I think Jairzinho's kickboxing was just too clean, he's too fast, too defensively responsible, and I think Tai Tuivasa being a brawler is a very bad matchup for someone like Tai for Jairzinho. I think that Jairzinho was able to go in there. He was able to use his kickboxing, his incredible kickboxing record. He's got like 75 kickboxing wins because he took this sport as a joke, but then actually got really good at it. He's done so many different things in the kickboxing realm, and Tai played right into that slow kickboxing fight that he had. And truly, it was a fight that Tai Tuivasa was destined to lose, considering that he was kickboxing at a very slow pace with one of the best kickboxers in the UFC in Jairzinho Rozenstruik. His kickboxing is really underrated, and he's getting his grappling better and better throughout the entirety of his career. Ultimately, I think Jairzinho Rozenstruik needs to go up in the rankings. I think I like a fight with Sergey Pavlovich and Jairzinho Rozenstruik next, or you might not want to push him that much more up in the rankings. If Johnny Walker comes up, I think that would be a great fight with Tai Tuivasa as well, because I know there's rumors of Johnny Walker entering the heavyweight division. But ultimately, this was a great fight between the two heavyweights, and I think that their futures are still great in the UFC. The last fight I want to touch on briefly is the Carlos Pratas versus Li Jingliang fight, and the Leech was back from a 2-year layoff, and he got absolutely swept by Carlos Pratas, and that was a very incredible knockout that we saw at UFC 305. Carlos Pratas looked like he just outclassed Li Jingliang with some of those strikes, and Li's chin has always been known to be good, but you cannot absorb so many shots from one person who is that good of a striker. So ultimately, I think Carlos Pratas got a very good win in that welterweight division. You could possibly push him up to a welterweight ranked fight with someone at the bottom 15 of the welterweight, or give him someone right in the top 20 of that welterweight division, because I think he is a very good up-and-coming prospect, and I think he can give some of these welterweight top 15ers a very hard time at the UFC. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Fight Season MMA, and please let me know down below in the comments what you think about UFC 305 happening. I thought it was a very incredible card to watch. Israel Adesanya versus Dricus Du Plessis was such a fun fight, with Dricus Du Plessis getting that rear naked choke in that fourth round. Also, Mateusz Gamrot versus Dan Hooker was an incredible war between two amazing lightweights. Kai Kara-France in the co-main event, KOing Steve Erceg. And then you got Tai Tuivasa and Jairzinho Rozenstruik getting the absolute war in the heavyweight division. And Carlos Prates getting a very incredible knockout over Li Jingliang. If you guys enjoy the UFC content, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. That is the best way to help support the channel. And please go down there and smash the subscribe button. It's free, and 97.2% of my viewers who watch the episodes are not subscribed. So please go down there and hit the subscribe button. It would mean so much. But thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Fight Season MMA. And I will catch you guys very soon with more UFC content and news.